Welcome to the review crew. It's just after 5 o'clock West Coast time on a Wednesday night. That means the No Proscenium review crew is meeting up to discuss what they've been seeing this week, maybe pick a pick of the week, and this time out in particular, talk about some of the news of the week, which is where we're going to start off. But I'm going to introduce who's in the mix tonight. To my personal extreme left virtually is the LA Reviews crew editor. Say hello. And my co-host.
This is Kevin Gossett.
Forgot that part. The laughter, was that who was laughing? Who was laughing? Just
it was me.
That is the executive editor of No Proscenium. Say hello.
Hello, everyone. This is Kathryn Yu.
Going over to the East Coast for a moment, our East Coast curator at large.
Hi there, everyone. It's Blake.
I hope your hand's doing well, Blake. Maybe we'll get into that later. And then I surprised him with that one. And our arts editor, who's also here in Los Angeles.
Hi, Laura Hess.
All right. So we're going to start with news. This time out, Punchdrunk tickets. Tickets went on sale today for The Burnt City, which is Punchdrunk's new show in London at the Woolwich whatchamaboober. I just forgot the name of what it's called. There's a new arts facility, and it's going to be 100,000 square feet. Everyone got excited. Turns out that's the exact same size as Sleep No More. So we know it's like the same size as Sleep No More. And the story is based off the Trojan War. So there are two cities at war with each other and an immersive exploration of that idea. So reactions to the news, y'all?
Don't forget 1920s Berlin.
1920s Berlin, yes, and some vibes of Metropolis, the film Metropolis. That's another critical part, and we're gonna definitely circle back on that in a bit. So, who's Blake? Did you already book a flight? You talked about.
I haven't already booked a flight. So today I've had at least an hour and a half of logistics conversations with my sister to see if I can get permission to crash on her sofa. I was planning on going to visit sometime in May anyway. This has just kind of accelerated the timeline. So we will hear back tomorrow at some point whether or not this is going to happen. So fingers crossed, everybody.
All right. And congratulations for having somewhere to stay while you're in London. That helps with the cost of the trip in a big way.
Oh, definitely. If it works, then this is the only question is whether to see it once or twice.
Wait,
yeah.
You're holding back once or twice?
Yeah, what about 3 times? 4?
Look, I'd love to do 3 times. The thing is, I just can't sick that on my sister. As someone who hasn't done a Punchdrunk thing before, I'm expecting her to be shell-shocked and exhausted after one.
Oh, God. Oh, so you're bringing a newbie. Wow.
I'm bringing a newbie. Hopefully I'm bringing a newbie. I'm very excited. The only other first thoughts that I've had are that I'm 100% following the Achilles and Patroclus track, and I am placing like $10 to whoever will take this bet that Cassandra is going to get the Wojciech monologue.
Oh, I mean, they freaking love yeah. Like they go to that well a lot, so yeah.
They're gonna do the same monologue, and my money's on Cassandra for the monologue. Prove me wrong, Punchdrunk. Surprise me.
All right. Who else? Kathryn. Kathryn, how about you? What's your vibe?
I'm just like swimming in this like future parallel universe, specifically because they've said like you think you know 1920s Berlin, but it's not going to be cabaret. We're using the music of Bartók as well as Grace Jones. So given the musical influence and the film influence and the fact that it is about the Trojan War, like I'm still trying to mentally piece together how all these influences are going to work together. And, you know, will it feel cohesive? Will the center hold? How much of what at least we as Americans love about Punchdrunk is because a lot of us know Shakespeare and Hitchcock, and I think some of these reference points might be a little bit more less part of an American education, let's just say.
So I think
Fair.
yes and no. I feel like, I mean, Greek gods and goddesses and kind of myth are pretty general touchdowns, even in America, even if it's like less than Shakespeare. But maybe those are kind of like equivalent things over here too.
Can we just get a quick show of hands among the review crew who among us had to read the Iliad in high school? Because I thought that was universal.
I didn't have to do the Iliad in high school, but I definitely did both, one of them in college. And I mean, as a theater kid, I had to read a lot of, Greek plays, and there was always references, and, we got a primer on the Trojan War. So I kind of feel like we're fairly conversant in it. And on the Metropolis side, as anyone who has any film school in them or took a film class, you're sort of by default exposed to that. And we all have the iconography of that movie handed down to us through Star Wars, right? The android in Metropolis being, the model for C-3PO. So there are these echoes in the culture that are kind of cornerstones, which I think will probably play out just fine. I'm not too concerned about people getting lost on that. I do think something that's interesting is we don't talk a lot about Punchdrunk as a company who really lean into the art of the remix and the art of remix culture, and this idea of mashing up Shakespeare and Hitchcock, mashing up, movies from the 1920s and the Trojan War, Bartok and Grace Jones. And yet it's so much a key part of at least their big works that it sort of fascinates me that it's not something that we talk about more, particularly because the whole arc of immersive as something that's accessible to people seems to really rely upon these moments of remixing things.
But at the same time, they have a show in Shanghai, right? So, and I've brought people to Sleep No More who did not grow up in the United States, and they loved it. And later on, had to like unpack like, oh, this was a reference to that, this was a reference to this other thing, but just like the sheer experience, like the sensorial aspect, the fact that it felt all encompassing and overwhelming, but at the same time, you could figure out how you wanted to play the world, like that all for the right person seems like just as valid an entry point, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things with Punchdrunk stuff is it's so kind of thoughtfully imagined and produced and put out there that it is, I think, easy to slide into that world, whether you're like familiar with the touchstones or not. Like, and I think because it is, especially Sleep No More is a mostly silent show. It's dance except for the one-on-ones really, and even then that's like light talking, that it can transcend kind of across cultures and language barriers. Like even if you're not familiar with the material, I think you can find something to kind of hook into regardless.
Now, Kevin, when we were chatting earlier in the day, you noted something in particular about this, and so I'm wondering, and I'm talking about like the LA connection here. And so I promised people Burnt City gossip, and so I think this is what I'm talking about here. So, you want to riff a little on this? I can do some deeper breakdowns. But
yeah, so I'll kind of go to how I got to that point. I think it was flipping through one of the articles, scrolling through one of the articles, and it mentioned something about Metropolis, and it was like, oh shit, like that was one of the touchstones when there was rumored they were doing something in LA, was that Metropolis touchstone, and it was like, oh, this is the show we could have had that we blew it on like 2 years ago, due to some city politics and some stuff around that. I think you probably have more information on that than I do.
So, yeah, when I saw the initial news, I noted two things. One, years ago, and by years ago, I mean 7 years ago, 6 years ago, when when I first encountered folks who were working with Punchdrunk out here, I'd started to hear the rumor was that they were really interested in the Trojan War. And there was one point where the rumor going around, and I never reported this out, but now the show is going up, so it's perfect time to talk about this. I never reported this out, but the rumor was that they were looking at having there be 2 shows, and that would, together would create this Trojan War experience. And there'd be a show in LA and a show in San Francisco, and that one would be Troy and the other would be, I guess Athens, or I guess Mycenae is, I think, where they're leaving from in the one that they're doing for Burnt City. And there would even talk of like some kind of like travel experience that'd be like some kind of premium package. This was at the time when they were experimenting with like Punchdrunk travel and like taking people on tours and all sorts of strange things they were trying out. But that was one of the first rumors, was that there were going to be 2 shows, and that the reason why we lost, that show in Los Angeles is because they had found a space in LA, but they couldn't find a place in San Francisco, right? Which, plays into the rivalry of those 2 cities, and also makes a lot of sense for 7 years ago when space is kind of cheapish in LA compared to SF, but in SF, like, you got to be kidding me, like impossible. Then just as late as I think, I want to say 2019, I'd have to look in my diary to get like the exact dates.
No, it was 2019. I remember because I sent you a text message and you were at Without Walls that day.
Right. There was, so it was 2019, and we had been talking to people at Punchdrunk who were like on the ground here in LA. And there was an article that had gone out, tipped out early, and they hate, they hate when something gets tipped out early. That was in, I want to say, I think it was Curbed or something like Curbed, one of those real estate, related, blogs. Someone at the hotel across, like the grand old hotel across from MacArthur Park in the MacArthur district here in Los Angeles, had tipped out that blog that Punchdrunk was talking to them about doing a show there. This turned out to be true. They had taken it pretty far down the road, but there was quickly like, oh, we're in negotiations. Nothing's all working, like no comment at the moment. It's like, okay, wait and see what happened. And then things advanced to, there was a planning commission meeting because they had gone so far as to like go for permits, and there was going to be a show at the hotel. There were permits being, sought for the bar that would be attached to the show in the hotel. Now that hotel happens to be next door to an elementary school. The hotel, I believe, predates the elementary school because the hotel's from like the 1920s or the 1930s. Like, it's old, right? It was going to be renovated and redone up. And this is, part of like, let's be honest and clear, part of a gentrification effort in that neighborhood, which is predominantly Latino, and borders on Koreatown. So it's a fraught topic. And if you know anything about LA city politics, particularly when it comes to land use and gentrification, like this is a tense thing here in a lot of ways. So you got to go delicately. There was that planning commission meeting was called for, and some of the stuff that was being sent into the planning commission, this is the thing that Kathryn sent me while I was down at Weil. Like the raft of documents included letters being written in that said, people from the community writing into the city council members saying, these shows have nudity in them. People are wandering around with the actors. People are going to be drinking. So it's nudity and actors and drinking. This is clearly a brothel. This is going to be a brothel. Like word, they use that word, right? Like the oldest thing to hurl at actors in the books. This isn't legitimate theater. This is a peep show. And there are going to be these drunk people at a peep show next to a school. And that had been entered into the public record. And
they had gone through like every review of the show ever and like excised just the parts where like someone saw a nude actor and compiled it all, so it looked terrible when you put just those bits together.
So the planning thing, I think it was like in November, a date. I go down to the planning commission on the day it's supposed to happen, and I get into that room in City Hall. And the first thing I notice, like, there's some people in there, but like it's a little bit dead, and the only people in there look like there's folks in the community. Some ladies brought like 6 kids with her, so like there was clearly going to be a moment where someone was like, "All my kids, think of my kids,
children,
think of the children." And mind you, Punchdrunk, which has Punchdrunk Enrichment, had reached out and said, "Hey, we have these programs." And in the stuff that was written to the city council member, like the neighborhood activist people were like, "Oh, we don't want this from these people," right? And let's be clear here at the same time. This is, a company from outside Los Angeles coming into a building, into a neighborhood that's like a lot of LA, threatened to be like, gentrified or re-gentrified, depending on which part of the cycle we're talking about. And there's lots of complex dynamics here. I've watched companies that are not native to Los Angeles stumble into LA and blow it elsewhere. But Punchdrunk is definitely sensitive to this stuff. So we get in there in the planning commission, and like I think I'm the only person from like the arts press in the room, and like it's 5 minutes after the meeting's supposed to start. It's 10 minutes after the meeting's supposed to start. And then someone comes in and says like, "Oh, the meeting's been canceled. They've pulled the permits. They pulled the permit requests." And so then I contact the planning commission and whatnot and say, "What does that mean that they pulled the permits? Does it mean that things are paused?" Like, no, they've completely pulled the permit requests. And if they wanted to get this version of what they were doing started, they'd have to start all over. They'd have to start from square one, and they'd sunk a lot of money into it at that point. So at that point, I knew that version of the show, which was, I'm going to look up the hotel while I'm blathering.
It's the MacArthur.
The MacArthur, not the Pan Pacific. Okay.
It says that the Performing Arts Center would have been named after Erebus, the god of darkness in Greek mythology, and they were asking for over 2,000 people occupancy.
Yeah. So really just like a totally different kind of scale than other things we knew about. And look, they asked for 2,000 occupancy. Whether or not they actually put that many people through is another question. But and that would have been a very large impact on that neighborhood. I mean, those of us who are in Los Angeles think about MacArthur Park and think about putting 2,000 people a night through that zone.
Think about the parking.
Think about the parking.
No parking.
Think about, there's all kinds of dimensions to it, right? But at that moment, that version of it was dead. And so hearing that there's, the Trojan War thing, which was hearing about the Metropolis stuff, because that was, like, to Kevin's point earlier, that was one of the things that was rumored about. There was a lot of talk, well, it's going to be Metropolis themed. And like, they've got these like there are these tunnels under the city. Like there's one point there was talk about how there are these big tunnels under Los Angeles that they were going to go perform and they'd secure the rights to, right? That was my favorite one. And that might even been true, right? Like these giant tunnels under Los Angeles where Punchdrunk's putting a show. And each one of these things failed out. Does this mean that what is going on in London is definitely what was going to be in LA? We don't know that for absolute certain, but we know that, Felix and Maxine have clearly been playing around with a lot of this material. They've been playing around with Metropolis. They've been playing around with the Trojan War for the better part of a decade now. And at some point in that development process, some of those materials were targeted for Los Angeles. And is there a timeline out there where somewhere in the multiverse, there's a 2020 where there's no pandemic and there's a Punchdrunk show in the MacArthur
in LA,
in Los Angeles.
Woo!
And London doesn't get the burnt city because, they're too busy enjoying their Los Angeles successes, which makes grand assumptions, because I also look at 2,000 people a night in Los Angeles, if that was their actual goal, and wondering, could that be sustainable in a city that doesn't have the kind of,
that doesn't go out on Tuesday, Wednesday,
the same way they do in London, the same way they do in New York. So it's a big question.
Well, then I think there's the other what might have been with the pandemic too. Like even if that had somehow gotten off the ground, would the pandemic have just wrecked these plans anyways? So to your point, there's like an alternate timeline where this happens, but it's probably not this one.
Oh yeah, somewhere in the multiverse, everyone's happy. Somewhere in the multiverse, score one. So.
In lighter news, I can say that I've been in the neighborhood around the future area. I know there's a really good meat pie shop about a mile away that I'll be dining at beforehand.
Mrs. Lovitz?
You joke about that, but it is that old. This is the oldest pie shop in London, and they sell only pies and jellied eels. So,
oh my god,
perfect thing to go and then have a belly full of
vegetarian pie. Vegetarian.
Wait, Blake, have you already had a jellied eel?
I have not had a jellied eel, and it's a sincere
Have you
regret.
had a jellied
That's why I
eel?
need to go back.
No, well, that's what I want to know. He's
okay.
he's saying that this is an offering, and I'm desperate to know now. I mean, I guess I could do a Google, but
whatever you do, Blake, just don't get a haircut at the place upstairs. Okay.
Wait, before we segue, I actually would like to come back to this mixtape idea because I think that's a really elegant and succinct way to encapsulate Punchdrunk's work. I'm as you all were talking, I was trying to noodle on, are there other immersive theater examples that use that kind of core philosophy or core creative approach?
I mean, you only need to look to Then She Fell. It's Alice in Wonderland, but make it a 19 teens asylum.
Right, so we've got Third Rail.
LA, you have Speakeasy, who did something similar with Wizard of Oz, more based on the novels, but kind of bring you up into like a Dust Belt era kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'll admit, it almost feels like an easy immersive game to play. There have been nights, actually, over drinks at the Mandalay Bar, where me and some friends of mine have played almost like, I think we just refer to it as the Sleep No More game, where we just go, it's X as done through the lens of Y with elements taken from Z. It's Aida done as a French New Wave film with elements of the Exodus story.
What's the best drinking game for creators?
Yeah, clearly. What's the best one that you remember? Is there one that stood out that you thought?
Looking back, I feel like we riffed a lot on Greek mythology because they were fun themes to come back to and everyone kind of knows the cast of characters. I think this was right around when Hades Town was coming out, and also the video game Hades. Hades was having a moment. So I think what we settled on was it's Orpheus and Eurydice on the eve of World War II, as done with, a little bit of the music of Wagner and a little bit of the invasive force of some Norse mythological elements in sort of some of the Nazi-esque roles. That one was good. We started to spin that one out. It sounded like it could have been a hit.
You know what? I'm gonna take your Orpheus and Eurydice, which I think is a perfect puppet for immersive. And indeed, Four Larks did one of their folk operas of Eurydice, of Orpheus and Eurydice. That was amazing. But at the time, they referred to it as immersive, and like we got into the tussle with it with them on that. Not a tussle, but we clapped back and said like, oh, this isn't really immersive. And what was nice about that is like they heard that and then would go on to produce some really amazing immersive work. And Four Larks is an incredible company, and they didn't need to call it immersive because like I was sitting there waiting for like, well, when's the immersive part starting? And it kept me from engaging with this really beautiful piece of work. That said, Orpheus and Eurydice, eve of World War II, the music of David Bowie.
Oh my god. The end of just her getting dragged back to Heroes. I see it now.
Oh yeah. I like this game. We'll play it more often. Okay. So, and in fact, I can tell everyone sitting down there probably wants to. Oh, Kevin, go ahead.
Oh no, I'd say we should do a special edition of the pod where we all just drink and riff on this idea.
Yeah,
I
no,
would
it sounds
100% do a no pro pitch night.
well. You know, I think that's something that we'd play with the audience. It's not necessarily fair to let everyone else like not get in on the game. You know, kind of like, I mean, there's exquisite corpse swords. We'll do something. I'm into this idea.
I do need to get my very stupid idea out there because
Yes.
it's in my head now, which is cat as 1920s Chicago gangsters. Think on that one.
Okay.
A
Okay.
lot.
Okay. I mean, I can see. Okay. You said cats. You said cats.
Yeah, cats.
Okay, cats. Okay,
You know.
cats, but Chicago, basically. You know, a little bit.
Yeah,
there, you know?
yeah.
Okay,
And immersive.
I could do that. And immersive. Okay, I can do that.
Do you get to drink out of little milk bowls at the
Yeah.
bar
Oh
before
God,
the show?
yeah. You know,
Of
they
course.
did that at the Alamo Draft House.
They did do-
I know.
Yeah.
That's like
Just
my biggest
hire
pandemic
Rachel.
regret.
Yeah. Okay. So, it feels like we're winding down this section, and we'll lose some of the live listeners as we wind down the Punchdrunk section. But
I
does
actually
any-
got to bow out.
and
I'm
Blake's
sorry
got
to
about.
say.
It's all good. But before
Thanks,
Blake
Blake.
does it, does anyone have anything else before we move on and talk a little bit about one of the pieces Kathryn saw this week at Venice?
I mean, I think it's just like an exciting thing to see is Punchdrunk's first like new like promenade immersive style work since Drowned Man in like 2013, and it seems to be borrowing elements from that with the kind of two cities thing, which I know was part of Drowned Man, the kind of the Hollywood area in the town. So I think it's just cool. Like even if it is far away and going to be hard to get to, I think it's awesome to see that they're putting on something new.
Yeah.
Kevin, post-pandemic flights are going to be cheap.
I'm already looking at it. Can I crash on your sister's couch?
Blake's sister Liz.
I'll say what. I'll tell you what. If I can't crash on my sister's couch, then we'll do a no pro backpacking trip together.
All right.
How does that sound?
Let's do it.
I would love it. That could be good. That could be good.
Catch you all later.
Catch you later, Blake. All right, moving on from London to Venice. Kathryn, you caught something that sounds like, honestly, like there's not so much going on. It's probably going to be pick of the week, so spoilers, everybody. But you caught something at Venice that sounds really kind of incredible. Break it down.
So it's a piece that I want to say is maybe like 40 minutes long by Blanca Lee, who is a extremely accomplished choreographer, came from the Martha Graham School, has worked with Beyonce, Daft Punk, Coldplay, the Metropolitan Opera, Michel Gondry, and this piece was supposed to be an in-person immersive project. There is dance, there is music, and you are supposed to be part of a group of 10 people being ushered along. And so it's like a processional with various characters and things happening, and you can like change your perspective. And because they couldn't do the real life show with the 10 audience members and the 2 professional dancers, they decided to record the whole thing in VR. And so the setup is that you've been invited to a gala. This woman, Adele, is finally coming home after her travels around the world. There's a partnership with Chanel. So you start out in this avatar gallery and you choose which Chanel costume you want to wear to the gown. And then all of a sudden this elevator door opens and this bellhop looking person, but like beckons you to like come with them. And all of the characters are human from the neck down. And from some of them, you can see like human colored skin where their neck should be. But then they're wearing these whole head animal masks that are metallic and a little bit geometric. So you start to get like, oh, it's kind of like immersive theater. And they're using a lot of song and dance. And oh my God, all of a sudden, I feel like I'm inside Alice in Wonderland, or I feel like I'm inside Moulin Rouge. There are so many non-player characters in the ballroom dance scene. Like I was just standing there, and they're not doing extremely complex movements. It's kind of like a waltz, but I'm like, oh my God, it looks like there's 100 other people in this ballroom. I'm looking down from a platform. The 2 main characters are behind me and they're dancing. And as they're dancing, you're also hearing dialogue. And it felt like I was inside a musical, but the musical was like on wheels. And so you have to like leave the ballroom and then go on a boat, and then you're in a garden, and then everyone's like, oh, let's get on the trolley and go to Paris. And then you literally like teleport onto a trolley and they take you through a tunnel, and then all of a sudden you end up in Paris. And it just felt like something I hadn't really seen before, something that was so singing centric and dance centric, that was supposed to put all this like spectacle around you. Like it really felt like the designers had carefully considered the fact that they wanted it to feel like it was 360 degrees around you and you had freedom of movement. And very similar to Sleep No More or Then She Fell, I had to get out of the way of the dancers a couple times. Now, none of this is live. This has all been motion captured, but it just felt like a really, really great attention to detail coming from someone who like choreography is like Blanca's language, right? And so the fact that this should have been a live theater show and they've entirely recreated it in VR, I think is just really fascinating.
Okay, so you say all of this was planned out to be an immersive theater piece. Had they rehearsed it all at this point? Like, do you know how close they had come to actually making this IRL before they went URL?
That I'm not exactly sure of.
Okay. Does it
I
feel...
tried to go in like blind, and so I was like, all right, let's see. But there are definitely some things that happen that would be extremely difficult to do in real life. And so I think, it's tough to figure out what the IRL like bones or roots of it would have been just from going through the virtual one. For example, after the frog bellhop person grabs you and puts you on his like gondola, there's a bunch of, I think, cat people playing harps, and they're floating in water. and there's definitely like it really felt like an immersive theater piece to me, because every so often the characters would be like, let's all go, or the trolley's here, or please get on the boat. And then they would pause long enough as if 10 separate people needed to climb onto a boat so we could get to the next act of the musical. And I'd be standing there being like, I'm here. And then after a few seconds, okay, now we're on our way. I'm like, oh yeah, reminds me so much of like the constant herding of people when you're trying to get them through like a lot of traversal in a physical piece.
Does it wind up feeling kind of lonely because there's no one there and they're doing that?
The actual traversal parts do a little bit, except at some point they dropped me off in a maze, and I was like, oh god. And the character's like, follow me. And I was like, oh my god, this really is like immersive theater. And I felt pretty alone in that bit. But when you're in the bigger set pieces, there's just so many other characters dancing and moving around. Like at some point we got into like this old school Hollywood with the like synchronized swimming numbers, where I looked down and I was like, oh, there's mermaids all around me. What is this? I have never seen anything like this in VR.
How this is a standalone? It's because like some of the things you talked about, it almost sounds like it was something that was in VR chat, but this is not a VR chat world.
This is not a VR chat world. The current platform is Viveport, and they did a lot of work, I think, around the motion capture and special effects, because the characters all look so good that I immediately was like, oh, this wasn't done like just in engine, and it's clearly not volumetric video. It has to be something else. And the attention to detail is pretty astounding, because there's just so much going on all the time. You look up and there's like someone walking a tightrope above you in the garden party scene. Meanwhile, the two characters are like having a fight, and you're like, oh no, will the lovers reconcile? And what's happening over here? Oh, it's a dance, and there's roses, and this is a fountain, and things are happening. What's going? So I definitely, I'm probably gonna have to go back through it a second time just so I can stop and look around at maybe some of the environments a little more.
And Kathryn, which one is this in your diary again? In the Venice VR diary?
I literally did it this afternoon, and I have not gotten a chance to write it up. But it's Le Bal de Paris de Blanca Lee. And Blanca Lee is the main creator on it, the choreographer and dancer who thought up all this stuff.
Well, I'm glad that Venice is taking place through the 19th.
Yes.
Do we have any sense of whether or not this is going to be released off the festival circuit afterwards, or is this still a circuit piece for now?
I think it'll probably be a circuit piece for now, but given that they really wanted to have the full body awareness with, participants and dancers, it sounds like when it's possible to actually try to like stage this in an immersive way. And that would be really cool to have like this a standalone festival circuit one that you could do wherever you are, but also have like the physical, like actualized version.
And you said this was about 40 minutes long?
Yes.
And so just to clarify, so the so there are these moments where the characters are kind of rounding you up. But when you're saying like you want to go back and explore, so is this, I guess I'm just unsure, is this something where you can take as long as you want to explore everything, or there is a kind of rail that you're on within this experience?
Oh yeah, you're definitely on rails.
Okay.
But I think just so much was happening at once that
Right.
I kind of want to go back in and, that's the beauty of a lot of this work is instead of facing this way, maybe I'll face a different way, or I'll see if like my perspective shifts, or try to pay attention to like different details, because they are dancing, but there's also dialogue and there's a story unfolding. And then there's these fantastical environments where you're like, okay, magical fountain ballroom. I'm in a lake now. Now I'm on a train. Hey, there's the Eiffel Tower. What just happened?
Right. Okay.
All right. It's definitely on my list. I think there's so much in Venice right now. Like I didn't even realize like how much I went through over the weekend, because I like you put your first three or four up in the diary late last night. I was like, oh, I should write some of those, and I wrote 3 up real quick, and then I was like, oh yeah, I've seen 2 others, and so there's pretty good material in there. I mean, I say that like I'm surprised. It's Venice VR Expanded. Of course, it's good material. I think the one that surprised me the most is a film, Monte Gelato, which is this really nifty, and it's like 30 minutes. I think it's like 28 minutes long. Which when I saw the runtime, I was like, I'll give this a couple minutes, see if it's any good. What it is these filmmakers have taken like 180 movies that were all shot at this one spot at the Monte Gelato Falls in Rome. And they've created this kind of living video collage. So you start off with like a scene from one movie, and then they kind of gray that out and then slap another scene down that kind of opens up more of the space. And over time, they build a picture of the full 360 degrees of the space. They show you where all the stuff is in relation to each other. And yes, there's kind of a culmination at the end, but like always you're looking at like just one part of the video is playing, just like the latest video they've got, but like kind of the ghosts of the rest of them are behind you in this collage, or behind that in the collage mode. And it becomes full 360 because they've shot movies, all kinds of movies, spaghetti westerns, Roman gladiator movies, like farces, romances, dramas, all kinds of movies all around this one spot. And it's just this really amazing kind of emergent memory of the location. It's almost like the dream of this place in the movies brought to life. And like I said, I started off thinking like, I'll give this a couple of minutes. It's probably going to be boring. And I was like, I was sitting on my floor and I was like, this is great. I love this. And watch the whole thing. And there's even some cheeky editing in it, like they go on little, there's some, movie editing art. They express their voice and their opinion that way. So pretty nifty piece, and something you could literally only do in VR with film. And that's very exciting to me, that like, here's something that couldn't exist in any other medium and couldn't exist without this other medium.
So, quick correction. So I'm on Blanca Lee's website. So this is supposed to be a 90-minute experience with 35 minutes in VR with 3 dancers and 10 participants. So this, I guess, is maybe just like the middle chapter. But yeah, I'm looking at pictures and there's humans in tuxedos and they're wearing gold animal masks and they're dancing. And so, dang, like I would like to see this at some point IRL now that I've gotten the taste of the VR version.
I love that. I love that there's these hybrid projects that are starting to emerge out. All right, Kevin, Laura, anything else on the mind or things we should be watching out for?
Yeah, I'll jump in on some art stuff that I think is really worthwhile. This was not this past Sunday over the holiday weekend, but there was a single day pop-up in LA. I'm sad that it was just one day, but I also think it's a great example of how these pop-up experiences can build on themselves and how they can, different companies and artists can come together and support each other. And we don't always have to, I was about to say, like, now that we're easing back into more in-person events, it's like, well, with Delta, I don't know where we are in this timeline and what's happening. But I think that because experiential can be so expensive, it is, I think, a really worthwhile opportunity to talk about different productions and events that are just one day only or one weekend only, and how that can add a lot of value to communities and how it can showcase artists in different companies. So there was this pop-up was co-hosted by 2 LA-based companies, Standard Vision and Vellum LA, and this was to showcase the work of an LA-based artist named Maggie West. And Maggie West is, she's a really interesting artist. She has a mix of it's photography, it's animation. She has digital art that, in this case, was being presented at the Standard Vision Studios. She's also done a lot of installation work, and so she has, photography editorials that have been featured in major magazines. She's also done a lot of large-scale public art installations for nonprofits. She's held benefit campaigns and events for Planned Parenthood. So there's a social impact aspect to her work. And then in this case, again, this was the digital side of her work. So what she does, it's incredibly vibrant work. And for anybody who went to Flutter, the Flutter experience in LA before the pandemic, and I don't know if they've reopened.
I believe they're open again.
Okay.
I drove by them the other day. They have a new sign out front.
So her, the Flutter experience did not resonate with me, but her room is actually, I think, the standout of the experience. Her room is really beautiful. And so she's known for this incredibly vibrant work of organic material, flowers and plants. And she does actually photograph these flowers, physical flowers, under these really saturated, colorful lights, and then goes in and they're isolated. There's time-lapse photography, and they're isolated. And so you wind up having these really, for people that know the artist Jennifer Steinkamp, who also does work that's in the same vein, or at least in the same arena, this has more negative space. This is more spread out. There's a different kind of distillation with her work that I think it's meditative in a different way, and it's spatial in a different way. And so this wound up, so her work was being featured, and like I said, this was co-hosted by Vellum LA, which is in partnership with Standard Vision. And so Vellum LA is going to be a physical space in LA. I think it's currently slated for this October. And they promote themselves as LA's first physical gallery for NFT-backed digital art. So you can go to this gallery and you can, because the NFT conversation continues to be very interesting to me around, like, how do you interact with this art? What does it mean to own art in terms of displaying it or feeling connected to it, feeling like it's yours? And I think there's a lot of interesting conversations around that. So to sort of chart where NFTs may go and how you interact with them and how that continues to innovate. So Vellum LA will be a hub in Los Angeles for that. And then Standard Vision is another fantastic company who's been around for quite some time. And they're an architectural lighting design studio is how they describe themselves. But I don't think that really encapsulates their work. Again, it's a real focus on public art. And if you're in LA, there's an installation over at the Beverly Center that I highly recommend by an artist named Khalil Joseph. And the Webster is the retail space, but this is outdoors. This is available to any pedestrian. You don't have to go during business hours. It's actually much better at night. So this is a lighting installation, lighting and video installation. And there's this real focus on the intersection of architecture and technology and art, and how do we create more humane, inspiring, creative spaces where we can actually build community. This is something that I feel like, especially in a place like Los Angeles with all the sprawl, we're really lacking that. We're really lacking that kind of, we talk a lot about intentionality in immersive work, and Standard Vision has such an eye on intentionality around that intersection of architecture, tech, and art. And I think that that's something that, as we continue to see hybrid spaces and how we're trying to innovate on that, making them more humane and more creative and more inspiring, it's so crucial. And I think, unfortunately, it winds up being a kind of an add-on for so many developers and so many tech companies. And I think these things really need to be so much more integrated. And Standard Vision really does that.
All right. Definitely something to keep an eye on is what's going on at Standard Vision and what Vellum's been up to. There's going to be some level of intersection between sort of our creative world and theirs. And I know like NFTs are still like this kind of very fraught thing.
Right.
Anything that intersects with crypto and the blockchain, there's just so many questions. Again, anything that intersects heavily with the art market, because the valuations in the art market are often, they're eye popping. And that's sort of what's going, the story of this year has been the intersection of the art market with digital art for the first time. And so now it's all kind of coming together. But there's definitely something in terms of some of the tech they're using and kind of emergent properties of some of this stuff that could be useful. The NFTs, the whole smart contracts part of it is really, really fascinating.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So with that as our notes, I think I know what we're going to do when it comes to pick of the week this week. And of course, all of you listening live, you already know all of the listening thing. It's pretty obvious. So Kathryn and I are going to go record a bit, or Kevin and Kathryn is going to go record a bit in a second here. And the rest of you, who are hanging around right now, we will see you in the not too distant. Maybe go hang out in the cafe, and we'll be back before you know it. Until then, for the review crew, I'm Noah, and this is No Proscenium, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening.